This is recording. I think it is. Well, good morning.
Good morning.
It's 8:30. We're going to get started. My name is Tim Kurth, and I'm with Lutheran Church Extension Fund. And let's open with a word of prayer and jump in. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this morning, for this beautiful location, for the days that we've had to catch up with old friends and make new friends and learn lots. So we ask, Lord, that you would benefit our ministries through what we've gathered here, and that we would not be overwhelmed, but understand that through your strength, we continue to serve in our ministries, and it is in you alone we trust. In the name of Jesus, amen. All right, well, my name is Tim Kurth. As I said, I'm with LCEF. This is Never Ask Strangers for Money, and we're in room 33. I was told to say that because we're recording. So, I want to start this morning by sharing a little bit about myself, and in a minute you're going to do the same. My full name is Timothy James Kurth. It's been my name since I was 4 years old, because my mom divorced Gerald Hanley and married Jim Kurth, so they changed my middle and last name from Timothy Gerald Hanley to Timothy James Kurth. So I was raised German Lutheran, and I have no German in me at all, zero. I'm Irish, 50% Irish, 22% Scottish, according to Ancestry.com. Next month I'll be going to Ireland to trace my Irish roots. I'm very excited about that. And I grew up, I'm the oldest of six. My mom was an Adams. Her great-great-grandfather was John Adams, not the president, but the Revolutionary drummer boy who hid in a flour barrel in Philadelphia when the French came to take him back home, and then went on a whaling ship for 2 years, and then came back, and when the French came back to pick him up again, he ran off to North Carolina and married Esther Hawkins. So that's on the Adams side of the family, some of my background. And I'm the oldest of six, so I have three sisters and two brothers. And I grew up mostly in Wisconsin. So I like my name. People tend to call me Tim. I prefer Tim. When I was in 7th grade, I was fairly verbal, and an 8th grader called me Mouthy, which was not a kind thing. And I had a 8th grade principal, Denny Vierick, who said to my mom, Tim should probably start competitively public speaking, or he's going to get himself in trouble. And so I started at 12 years old in the Optimist Club doing competitive public speaking. So that's a little bit of history. I could do more history about my name, but that's a little bit about me and my history. And here's what I want you to do. I'm going to get you together in groups of 5, and I want you to do the same thing. Tell the people in your group your first, middle, last name, any other names you've had. So if you've had a married name, a maiden name, anything about your name. I want you to share a little bit about family history. If you know your background, where you came from, if you're German, if you're Irish, if you're Scotch, if you're Egyptian, whatever. And then what you prefer to be called, and whether or not you like your name. I do like my name. It's common, but I like it. So get together in groups of 5, and we're going to do this. We're just going to take about 5 minutes. So everybody gets about a minute to share. So no larger than groups of 5. There you go. So make sure everybody gets a chance to share.
Where are you from?
Optimus oratorical speaking. I've never met anyone else that
Really?
did that.
Yes. Original oratory, baby.
Yep.
That's great.
We got a small group, we got it.
You're already done? Say more about yourself. Get to know each other. We'll give it another.
Get that one off.
On that trip to Germany, we went to the National Valley, Stuttgart, where my mother, my elder, and I did a test before each time of it. I was in Kansas, FFA, we were all the company that I read in Cleveland, Ohio, and all the samples.
I did 4-H and FFA, so.
There you go. I know. They know how to be concise.
That's unfortunate. I know. Small wineries are going under in Europe simply That's me. I'm a pastor.
I actually used to think we were Irish meat greer, which is somewhere in there somebody married an Irish person. It's actually from the right thing and it's kind of worked its way into the
Green renders air conditioning, so it's
like the German Scottish really. Before you married out, he and I were president, so mainly German style. Felt the guys from there, so I was very they're all very Andrew also, fun story. So my grandpa, he was there actually. He was Merlin Anderson. He went to work for 18 years. What's four guys. They still don't know me as Chris. So I had and last name Anderson, and went by Andrew.
Okay, so we're on the south side.
I went by my initial. Where's Kansas City? Other than that, I'm a development director and also called
We have about one more minute. One more minute. Make sure everybody's had a chance to share. And if everyone's shared, get to know each other a little more.
You're all German.
being small. I'm the middle child.
Paul is my coach. Usually say within 7
Yes, he did.
That's where I'm at.
That's right. Yeah, he was my principal. Love that guy. He's still around. He's still in Janesville.
He's still in Janesville. He still comes in and volunteers. He's next time.
Yeah.
He was a mentor or whatever for our school teachers this year. Yeah.
He changed my life. Literally changed my life. Jump in with this group of 3. We're in groups of 4 or 5. All right. Let's stay in your groups because I have some questions for you to process. So stay in your groups. Stay in your group. Here I have some questions I want you to process. So first of all, I want you to talk about this, answer this question in your small groups. How did you feel when I asked you to share your name and details about yourself? How did you feel about that? Go ahead and talk about that for just a second. Everybody share. And whatever you felt. If you felt like Tim's crazy, why am I here? Whatever. And you're going to catch up by sharing your full name, first, middle, last, the roots of it, and if you like your name, what you prefer to be called. So a little bit about yourself using your full name.
Have any connection, family-wise, amongst your history? I mean, that's always.
Yeah, so my dad actually worked with my great uncle and grandmother. And they did kids. Well, he actually had somebody that does it, I think, for his job.
Did a family tree?
Yeah, so.
Okay, this next question's a little bit more self-revelatory. I want you to share with the group how you decided how much of your personal story to share in this exercise. How did you decide how much of your personal story to share in this exercise? Go ahead and talk about that in your group.
I'm working. I said, I don't know what to say, so I'm going to start right here. First, and let's see what they're doing.
And then you said I was short, and then I
You had a good framework.
Good.
We're a very boring group.
All right. I would love to hear back from your small groups, just some of your answers. First of all, how did you feel when I said share your name, tell your name and a little bit of your personal story? How did you feel about that? Yeah.
We didn't care.
Didn't care. Okay. All right. Okay. Somebody else. How else did you feel? Any feelings out there?
I was excited. I can talk about myself all day.
Excited. Okay. Great. Great. Okay.
I'm nervous right now because is that a smart board? You should be writing on it.
It is, but they write on it all the time.
Okay, sorry.
It is a smart board. I felt nervous about that yesterday because Don Christian was writing on one of these, and I thought, well, if Don can do it, I can do it.
Sorry.
No, they've written on it. It's a whiteboard and a smart board. I thought that might be true. So, not nervous now, but how about when I asked you, anybody else, what other feelings were you aware of in that moment?
I started laughing
Why?
because I couldn't remember the other guy's name, and I wanted to know it. His thing was turned around.
All right. So you were amused? Well, I'm going to write that down. Amused. Curse was amused. All right. Anybody else? Feelings? Come on, folks. I know we're all Lutheran.
I was happy to get to know other people.
Okay. All right. Anything else?
I was happy I didn't go first.
Ah, okay. Good.
I'm an introvert.
I was a little bit self-conscious just because you did a great job of talking about your lineage and they did as well, and I was like, boy, I need to know more about my people.
Ah.
I suspected you were manipulating us.
It could be. And I don't know if I spelled that right or not. Okay, good. Good.
In some things, not in this one, but in some places, it's annoying.
Annoying. Yep.
You know, it's like get into a group and do this.
Uh-huh.
Oh, yeah.
Again.
Yep. That's why I like leading. That's why I like leading, because I hate getting into groups and doing this kind of stuff. So if I get up front and make you do it, I'm really, really happy. But I get annoyed when people say it to me.
I almost walked out because I didn't want to be in a group like this.
Almost walked out. Okay. All right. So how did you decide how much of your personal story to share?
good stuff. The good stuff.
The good stuff, okay? So,
I left behind the fact that I'm an axe murderer.
that's exactly right, right? So decide to share the good stuff. What else?
Follow your example.
Okay, so follow the example. Others, how did you decide how much to share?
Based on how much time you gave us.
Time, okay. Great. Others,
Not only the knowledge I have.
okay.
It's the only funny story I have, so it was perfect. That's the only one I can remember.
Okay.
Connections to famous people.
Sure. Who of us doesn't like to name drop? Come on, be honest. All right. All right. Anything else about how you decided what you decided to share with people? All right. Last question in your small groups for now, anyway, and that is, how is this exercise like or unlike donor development? Talk in your groups. How is this exercise like or unlike donor development? And you can look at the notes up on the board if you need some prompts.
When we go into churches, finance development,
Actually getting this kind of thing. Like sharing your middle name.
Is there some moment where you have to ask?
figure out how.
You know, they're there. They're like, oh, I want to support you. It's great to see the vision. I want to be involved. But is there that like tipping point? I feel like for us, they just need that. Oh, yeah. Thank you for.
Well, usually in our opportunities for people to step in. It's rare that I don't sponsoring one individual child.
So you put it in that air.
And we make sure that we get the connections. So is this kind of we pass it around, make sure everybody writes down.
So there's avenues to give.
Because I find that
Yes.
the more people know
It's not really.
who you are and what you're doing,
And yes, it's general donor development. Well, relational. Yeah, but it's going to apply to congregations as well as nonprofits.
So I know I need to start using more of this,
Yes,
but I don't know how, so I wanted to come here.
that's why we're talking about it. Good. So hopefully,
that's when I sure think I need to go for that. Particularly, go for the big churches. What a lot of people don't understand is that those big churches get hit by everything. We found actually has more tangible success, if you want to call it that, from small churches because everybody avoids them. Everybody goes there. That's where they're looking to own a mission network. Oh, that's a
okay. Take about 30 seconds. Make sure you've finished your thought, and then we'll come back. Okay, I'm interested in hearing some of your thoughts. How is this like or unlike donor development? What have you been talking about in your groups? Connection. Say more about that.
Learning something about them to see if you can pick up a connection to
Okay. Yep. Good. So talking to people to see if you can find a connection. We didn't even visit, but I found out I have a fellow Optimist Club speaker right here. Original Oratory. There you go. Other things. What else did you see?
What was the question again?
How is this like or unlike? Same question we were talking about. How is this like or unlike donor development? This exercise.
Developing trust.
Developing trust. And how do you develop trust?
Over time, listening and getting to know people.
Over time, listening, getting to know people.
Talking about them, not yourself.
Talking about them, right?
The hero of the story.
They're the hero of the story, so inviting them in, right? Yeah.
One of our ladies pointed out, and I thought this was very astute, that as we talked about these things, we were talking about our feelings, and she said, we don't know how that other person that we're just getting to know is feeling.
Right.
That's kind of an anxious thing.
Yes. So yeah, some of the stuff we talked about it could be annoying, right? I could be self-conscious about wanting to share too much. I don't know you yet, right? Especially Germans, right? Yeah. So why did I start with a name?
We all have one.
Exactly. And when do we get that? Except for this guy over here waited 24 hours to get one. But at birth, right? I worked with our children's ministry director years ago, and she and her husband, both of them, had a very hard time making a decision. The hospital would not release them until they named their child. It took them 3 days. 3 days to finally settle on a name. And I think they pretty much knew they were pregnant for months, but still 3 days in the hospital before they could come up with a name for the poor child. So names, by sharing a name, you start to tell your story. So names are super important. We had this conversation before the session started. When you're in a Walmart or someplace where they have their name on their vest, if you say somebody's name, you see that instant panic, and they're like, how do I know you? Where do I know you from? Because they've forgotten that they've got their name on there. You know, you work every day, you forget you have your name on it. And if you call them by name, you catch them because our name identifies us. Also, by doing this name exercise, it opens the door to talk about yourself. And I heard again over here, because this is where I was able to hear the best, talked about middle name, right? Right away, I said share your full name, first, middle, and last. Well, middle names can be a little dicey, right? Because where do they come from? My son is named Jesse Isidore Kurth, because my stepfather's foster father was a Russian Jew named Isidore, who I just dearly loved. So he's named Isidore. And we were aware growing up it may not be a middle name he wants to share with people because it's unusual. And so it immediately, you have to choose, am I going to be vulnerable and share a little bit more about myself? And then that second question, how do you decide how much to share? Right? So knowing that when you get into and we're talking strictly relationships now, we're not going to talk donors yet for just a bit. We're talking about human relationships. We all decide what we want to share. Do we want to share the good stuff only? Early on, that's kind of what we want to share, right? I don't want to get into the details of the stuff of my life that I struggle with, right? So maybe a little shocking for me to stand up and say, my name's Timothy James Kurth and has been since I was 4 years old, and immediately tell you about divorce in my family, right? But drill down into that, I could tell you about alcoholism and other addictions, and I could talk about, when you start talking family stuff, all that stuff can come out if you choose to share it. And so when you start getting to know people, you start by, good stuff, follow the example. If you're transparent and share a little bit, the other person feels safe and shares a little bit. So we start thinking relationally. We think about time available. How much do I want to get into? And this is even a counseling thing. If any of you have done counseling or been in counseling, you know the term presenting concern. You ever heard that term, presenting concern? That's the concern that brought them in the door, but it's not really what they're wrestling with. So when I was a youth director, DCE, I would have young people come in and talk about something, and that was their presenting concern. And then when the time was up, as they were leaving, they go, I think my parents are getting a divorce. Whoa, wait. You started here, you talked about this, and you threw something out on the way out the door because you didn't have any more time to deal with it, right? You wanted to shortcut that. So time available, I have to decide in the time available, how much do I want to share? How vulnerable do I want to be? But time is an issue. So only the knowledge I have, I don't remember the window, but there's a window, 4 panes. I never remember, what's the name of it? Is that where what I know about myself? Yeah. What I know about myself and others know about me, what others know about me and what nobody knows about, I or others don't know about me. And life is a constant discovery about how much do I know about myself and how much am I willing to share with others and where am I going to go. This is all relationship building 101. What is the overarching need what's the overarching, what do I want to say? What's required to build a relationship at a minimum? Caring, trust, time. Time. Takes lots of time. And so the theme, our topic for today is never ask strangers for money. And the way to not be strangers is time, right? Time. So, and then employing all these things, right? Being vulnerable, being available, being transparent, and building a relationship. Because we're talking about human relationships. Where's my eraser? So, before we go into some of the other things that I wanted to talk about today, I want to find out what you need to get out of this session. So I'm going to take a minute and have you tell me what we can do today, this morning, that will help you face your greatest challenges in raising financial support for your ministry. So I'm going to erase this and grab the marker and ask you, what are your greatest challenges to raising financial support for your ministry?
For me, it's what is the starting point?
Okay.
And to me, the low-hanging fruit are, I know there's, in our congregation, older people, so how do I talk about, planning after they pass to,
Okay.
give the assets to the church. That would be my main thing.
Okay.
Building plan would be a bonus, like how do you raise money for stuff like that, but
Sure.
I think that the baseline is.
Okay, good.
A month ago, I became a self-funded missionary, and so I've known how to talk to people for years, but to actually transition into will you support this?
Okay. How do we say that? Yeah. Okay. Others.
I would say dealing with confidentiality, because there's some people, for some reason, in a church setting, I mean, it could be a Lutheran school, and they're like, yeah, absolutely, put my name on the wall, great. But please don't tell anybody I give, or don't tell them anything about what I have, or they're very private when it comes to church.
Okay. Good. Who else?
Overcoming the fear that you are manipulating the relationship.
There you go. Good.
If the only people that give to your organization are not strangers, how do you do new donor acquisition? There you go.
Yep. Okay.
I have one that's pretty maybe peculiar and specific to my situation.
Great. Love peculiar. Go ahead.
My organization has a major donor that we count on every year.
Mm-hmm.
However, the previous director has passed away. That person had the relationship with the donor, and I don't.
Okay.
How do I help them to continue to know the organization and know me?
Yep.
Just the little things that help continue the relationship when I have very limited time. What are those littlest things that I can do that continue to have the greatest impact over time?
Okay? I'm going to call that nurturing the relationship. Okay? Anybody else? I want to make sure we answer these today before we leave.
I don't know what it's called when they leave a legacy gift, but it's non-binding until that, so they can change that?
Sure. Yep.
How do you continue to maintain a relationship without estrogen?
There you go.
If Minnesotans don't want relationships, what do you do?
I'm good. I've got enough.
I reject your premise. Everybody wants a relationship. Oh. My mom was born in Minnesota, so.
First off, if you live in the South where a relationship takes 3 hours.
Right, yes, right? And you have anything else? Anything else you want to make sure we answer today and talk about? So we're going to get to all of this. Okay?
I think when you have a couple,
Yep.
they may not be on the same scale.
Okay? That I can't help you with. Okay, dealing with.
Like a surviving spouse situation.
Yep.
Starting a funding campaign for a church.
Say that again.
Starting a funding campaign for a church.
Okay.
I'll throw this in there because I'm a principal. But we have a unified church school budget.
Okay.
There are some people that are kind of turned off by some things that the church have been doing, but still have a passion for the school. But then since it's going to a unified budget, like how do I maintain that school side of the relationship, even though they know that the money is going into the same money pot eventually?
Okay, good. Oh my gosh, we're hitting all the high points. This is good, and it's a challenge. All of it's a challenge. So let's start, and we will get to all these questions. Let's start by laying down a basic understanding of the difference between transactional and relational. All right, transactional and relational. We are, without a doubt, in the United States, north, south, east, west, a transactional culture. Now, some of that is softened in some of the more rural or southern areas. You'll see if you go into the hardware store in Alabama and you don't first ask about the cashier's kids or how church was on Sunday or talk about the weather before you ask for the paint, they'll think you're rude. If you go into a store in New York, a hardware store in New York, and you don't ask for the paint and get your butt out of there, they think you're annoying. They don't want to hear about your kids. They don't want to tell you about their kids. They don't want to know anything about you. They want to sell you paint. But in both cases, there's a transaction that's happening. That's what's brought you together. And so the first thing we have to do in donor relations is understand the difference between transactional and relational. Relational looks completely different. And I'm going to argue today that to be successful in never asking strangers for money, we have to stop thinking transactionally. So let's think about some of the things we do in donor relations, donor development. And for the purpose of this, I'm going to say fundraising. Because here's my bias. Fundraising is not donor relationships. Period. It's not. So let's talk about fundraising. What are things that we do now, have done, have always done, that you probably still do today, that is fundraising, that is transactional? List all the things you can think of that are transactional things.
Bake sales.
Bake sales. Yep. Good.
Annual appeals.
Annual appeals. Okay.
The donor portal on your website.
Aha, yes, okay.
Auctions.
Yep. What else? Offering envelopes. Ooh, you're hitting them. And more specifically, yeah,
Stewardship drives, even though they're about more than money.
that's what we tell ourselves. Okay, what else is transactional? This list is everything we do. Tuition. Yep. Yep. Well, and that's the unique challenge for RSOs, right? So congregations, well, we're all transactional, but in a congregation, it's not fee for service, technically. But when you stop your worship service or make it a part of worship to hand that plate down the aisle, right? That's a transaction. You just heard a good sermon, now drop your offering in the plate, right? Or we're here every Sunday for worship. I was at a church in the 80s where this was actually said at a church council meeting because we were struggling with budget. Well, what if we just don't turn on the lights this Sunday and leave the organ turned off and tell them that if they don't increase giving, we're not going to be able to pay the electric bill? I'm like, oh, seriously. Like, because mentally, that's where we go. We're transactional. I give you this, you give me that, right? And we can get into a whole conversation about the damage that's done to the church and families and our culture, etc. But look at this. This is all stuff you do, right? And I'm not saying you shouldn't do these things. I make my living helping places run capital campaigns, right? There is a time for that. But if you're going to run a capital campaign or you're going to do an annual appeal, and that's all you do, you have become transactional exclusively, right? If you don't know the donors you're asking money for, you've become transactional exclusively. If your fundraising is limited to a spring appeal letter and a fall appeal letter, or a monthly appeal letter, or a quarterly appeal letter, and that's it, you are transactional. And you are training your donors that the only time you're going to talk to them is when you need money. Which then makes them feel like an ATM machine. And I've told this story 1,000 times. I worked as a development director, and I had an executive director who was very focused on getting the money in, get the money in, get the money in. And one time he texted a donor and said, we need $5,000 by the end of this week to make payroll. Can you make a gift? And that donor did, and then he came to me and said, tell Adam to stop treating me like an ATM machine. So that is transactional. I need this from you in order to continue this, whatever we're doing. So, I'm not saying stop any of this. I'm saying when you do these things, you better be asking people who know you and love you and want to help you and see this as an opportunity to do that. Or stop doing these things. Okay? So that's transactional. So relational, and this comes out of, and this is a book I'm going to recommend. There's a book by Henry Nouwen, which is actually a transcription of his speech that he gave to a nonprofit many, many years ago. Nouwen died in the 90s. It's on Amazon, costs you $8, and it's called A Spirituality of Fundraising. A Spirituality of Fundraising. That book helps all of us understand that all of fundraising is relational. It's relational. And Nouwen says, if you're uncomfortable asking for money, or the person you're asking is uncomfortable being asked, you're doing it wrong. How I've distilled Nouwen's teaching is this, that we are looking for people whose hearts align with our ministries, and we're inviting them into a partnership with us. Right? And I'll say more about that in just a little bit. So, relational stuff looks like visits, touches, connections, and alignment. Okay? Visits, touches, connections, alignment. We'll talk more about alignment in a little bit. Questions? We're going to get to all this in a minute. All right, so let's talk about alignment. In donor relationships, I've distilled it down to this. All of the resources in the world belong to God. It's the Sunday school answer. Jesus. What has a bushy tail and runs through the woods? Jesus. No, it's a squirrel. Right? The classic Sunday school question. So, all the resources in the world belong to God. God has distributed all of those resources into the lives and the bank accounts of all the people in the world. God has then aligned all the hearts of all the people in the world to support all of the work in the world that needs to be done. So, what's our job? Our job is to discover the people whose hearts align with the ministries that we lead, and then walk in a relationship with them to help them discover how much of God's resource they are to be releasing to our ministry. That's a long process, right? So when we start thinking it, what's that?
Especially if you're going to get to everybody.
Right. So and you're not going to get to everybody in the world. So what does that mean? That means you have to have processes in place to find the people whose hearts align with your ministry. You have to have processes in place to, first of all, identify people who might be interested in what you're doing. Then you have to have a way of qualifying them. So are they somebody who really, really is interested in what we're doing? Or not? And if not, they go over in this pile over here. If they are, then to what extent? Now I need to spend time with them and get to know them and find out how passionate they are and what it is about our ministry that excites them. And ministries have different facets. And then over time, I find out just how excited they are and to what extent they want to contribute their financial resources to the work that we are doing together. Now that takes a long time. Statistically,
I would say that's also a little tricky sometimes because let's say you have to fly and there's some expenditure to the ministry.
Yep.
There's always the fear that you're spending more than there is a potential reward.
Yes.
In terms of the transaction.
Yep. So when it comes to that, and this is a nuance we won't get into today, but the whole thing of helping donors understand that there is an expense to raising money. What you don't want to do is, what you want to know in your organization is, what does it cost you to raise $1? All right? What does it cost you to raise $1? So if you're spending on a mail campaign and print house and postage and all that stuff, and it costs you $50,000 to reach your entire donor database with an appeal, and you raise $48,000, it's cost you negative dollars to raise money. If you get $60,000, you've spent 90 cents to raise $1. So your net is only 10 cents. Right? So you've got to be able, and those of you who are mathematicians know I probably didn't do all that exactly right. But the point is, you've got to be able to express to your donors that there is a cost to us doing. There's an administrative cost. One of the mistakes we've made, and there's some great TED Talks out there, and I forget the name of the guy, but look it up, on how we in our culture have somehow given donors the idea that everything we do is free. Right? And that all of their money goes to the cause that they support, like directly. Like if I support a food pantry and I give you $100, $100 worth of food is going to be purchased. No, $75 worth of food is going to be purchased, and $25 is going to go to help pay for the lights and the salaries and all that other stuff, right?
And to qualify as an RSO,
Right.
That's tricky.
It is tricky. Yep. And you got to play some games sometime. Not that I'm saying you should play games to keep your RSO status. I didn't say that. It's not on the recording. But also just as an integrity thing, we don't want to be spending 80% of our donated dollars on nice offices and cars and stuff that's not helping the ministry that we say they're helping. So there's that fine line there. But again, how do I communicate that? I communicate it in relationship. So let's get to this question. There's one. How do I continue? No, there's... Oh, the unified budget one. That's the one I wanted to talk to. So if you have a unified budget, here's legally... I'm not advising you do this. Legally, if a donor designates dollars, the organization has to use the dollars for which they're designated. So if a donor writes on their check or includes in their check a letter saying, this is to be used exclusively for the school, it doesn't matter if it's a unified budget. Any organization with any integrity and ethics and legally has to use that money for what it's intended. I just had a conversation a week ago with a school that had a capital campaign. They didn't raise as much as they wanted. They did their thing. They got some money left. And some of the board members of the organization are saying, great, we have that money left. Let's just put that over here. And the campaign folks are going, I don't think we can do that. And I'm like, you absolutely cannot do that. You said what you would do with campaign funds raised. You have to do something that fits in what the campaign said the money was raised for. But you guys, we can all tell stories. We all know the stories of organizations that raised money, did capital fundraising, did an annual appeal, said this is what it's for. People said this is what it's for. And then they took that money and paid salaries, or they took that money and turned on the lights. All stuff that needs to be done, but an absolute violation of the donor relationship. And if you violate the donor relationship, you lose your donors.
And your auditors will not be happy.
Right. Yep. So in terms of when we talk about unified budget, now, here's the caveat to that. I always tell people if you're getting designated funding, that's a red flag to me that tells me the donors don't trust you. If I'm going to hand you a check and say you can only use that for this, I'm telling you I don't believe you're running the organization as well as you could run it. The more general giving you get, to me, that's more of a sign, first of all, that your donors trust you, that they know what you're doing, and that they trust that what you're doing with their money is going to benefit the ministry wherever you can use it best. So if you're getting a lot of designated giving, start asking yourself, how strong is my relationship with my donors, and what am I doing that's causing them not to trust me to run this ministry? And ask them that. One of the things that I do for LCEF is something called discovery. And I boiled it down to this. I am always looking for impediments to donor confidence. All right? What's included in impediments to donor confidence? Historical mistakes of the organization, so skeletons in your closet. Leadership that doesn't have a good relationship with donors, or they don't trust the leadership is doing what they say they're doing. Poor governance, so poor board governance. Poor donor relations. So what do I look at when I go in and look at an organization? I look at administration, I look at governance, I look at donor relations, and I look at their ministry history and what they've done. Right? So then I can say to a board, great organization, you got all this going on, here are the things that are going to keep your donors from being as generous as they could possibly be. Because when the pen is poised over the check, what's in the donor's mind about your organization is going to determine whether they're going to give you everything they're capable of giving you or something less than that. So, it's all relationships, and relationships are a need in the human heart. Yes?
What if your organization that you're working for has a history of misusing, in the past, the intention of donors?
Yep.
What's healing that if you're new to the organization?
You do what I call getting the poison out, which means you've got to sit through some really hard conversations with donors who are going to tell you just why they're disappointed in your organization, what was done historically, and you have to be able to not make excuses for it. This is simply a customer service tip. Find a way to agree with people, right? It doesn't mean you agree. Find a way to agree, and what I mean by that is, I come up and I'm at an event like this, right? And I struggle with food addiction, right? And this place is just crazy with food all the time. Now that's a hospitality issue, which is great, but if I'm a food addict, I'm being bombarded by every kid with a wagon and a basket with every kind of food that could really wreck my discipline, my sobriety as a food addict, right? So that really upsets me. So I buttonhole Jeff Schrank over in the corner. I say, how in the world could you be pushing so much food on so many people? Don't you see the unhealth in this? Don't you know about our obesity? And Jeff Schrank's going to go, you're exactly right. We have a struggle in this country with obesity. And we walk a fine line here on how to be hospitable, and food is a way of expressing hospitality. But I can see where that would really be a struggle for some folks. Thank you for sharing that with me. Now, it doesn't mean I agree that there shouldn't be all that food there, but it means that I found a way to agree with his concern or her concern, right? Same with a donor. They're going to unload on you. That last executive director, blah, 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 blah. 5 years ago, I gave to build a chapel, and they never built the chapel, and I'm never given another dime to that school. That's horrible. I agree. That was a misuse. That was a mistake. I agree with you, and I'm sorry that happened. We're working to rectify that.
Sometimes you have to endure the bad experiences that people have had with similar ministries.
Yes.
Yours, particularly because we work in Africa, and there are, all you have to do is say Nigeria, and all of a sudden horror stories come to people's minds. We're not in Nigeria, but people who don't know Nigeria from Kenya.
Right.
You gotta bear that burden sometimes.
Yeah, and I was in Uganda one time, and the guy I was working with introduced me to a phrase I'd never heard before: suitcase ministries. I'm like, oh, what's that? Briefcase ministries. It's like, what's a briefcase ministry? It's somebody who puts up a website and milks tender-hearted Americans who will never get over to Africa, and they're working out a briefcase, and they tell stories, and money goes no further than them, right? Exactly right. So, yes, so you do have to overcome some of that. Speaking of overcoming, and this is something I learned early in my career in development, I worked with a team in the late 90s to start a Lutheran high school in the Chicago area, and would talk to key donors, potential donors, $1 million donors, big money people, and they would say, well, who's in charge? And I'd say, Pastor so-and-so and me. I was a DCE at the time. And they're like, I don't trust any ministry that's run by a pastor or DCE because they don't know what they're doing from a business standpoint, right? We have enough history of having given to ministries that are run by well-meaning, wonderful, faithful, God-fearing pastors and teachers and DCEs that have not a clue what to do with the money you give them. Don't know how to put a business plan together, don't know how to build a budget. And I was super offended because I was a DCE and I thought, I got my act together. I know what I'm doing. And then I left full-time church work and I went and worked for a $10 million nonprofit that was part of a publishing company that, and guess who we had trouble with? Ministries that were run by pastors and youth workers who didn't know how to get their things in on time, didn't know how to do their stuff, didn't know how to put a budget together. So some of that you have to put up with too. Big donors are going to look and go, do you really know what you're doing? Right? So those are some of the impediments to donor confidence. So let's go back to transactional relational real quick, because I have a story to tell about my first big donor solicitation. It was in the late 90s. I had gotten involved with a project to start this Lutheran school. It was in the Chicago area. And if any of you know the name Jay Christopher, anybody heard the name Jay Christopher? Jay Christopher's wife, Doris Christopher, started a little company called Pampered Chef. And the Christopher family is well known, at least in the Chicago area, and pretty much in a lot of philanthropic circles as very generous to schools. There's a Christopher Center on the campus of Concordia, Chicago. There's Christopher Library on the campus of Valparaiso. They've pretty much funded Walther Lutheran High School, now Walther Academy, in the Chicago suburbs. And so here's what I knew about Jay Christopher and the Christopher family. They love Lutheran education. We were starting a Lutheran school. I didn't know Jay from anybody. Never met him, didn't know anybody who knew him. And to this day, I'm not sure how this happened. I asked Jay, I got to him and said, I would like to come and talk to you. And he said yes. I said, great. So myself and another board member went to Jay's office, sat across the desk from him. 5 minutes into the conversation, I said, Jay, I'd like you to give our school $5 million. I didn't know Jay. I didn't know what he liked. I didn't know anything about him. Jay looked back across the desk. He goes, that might be a little high. I'll keep an eye on your project and let you know. Never got a dime from Jay. I was new to the business. I was new to this whole donor stuff. I was still very transactional. And so there wasn't a snowball's chance I was going to get a dime from Jay, and I should have known that going in. But I thought I knew enough about him. Didn't ask how his family was. Still to this day don't know really not much about the Christophers, other than that they founded Pampered Chef, and in 2002 they sold it to Warren Buffett for $700 million. That's all I know. It's all transactional. So when we do that, we dishonor the person we're talking to because we don't know them, and we embarrass ourselves when we do that. Okay? So, side story. Let's get to some of your questions. Make sure we've covered. Oh, let me talk about this first.
So how would you now have
approached Jay? I've gotten to know his daughter, Kelly. She and I have had good conversations about ministry. I've talked to Kelly about the family supporting some things, and we've actually gone down the path of looking into that. Relationship-based, I now know what her email address is. I know what her phone number is. I can get in touch. I know that she has the control of the family foundation. And if I wanted to talk to Kelly, I would reach out to her, and I would, first of all, see how she was doing. I'd remind her of our connection to common ministries that we both support and enjoy. And then I would explore with her, I'm thinking about this, what do you think of that? Is that something you would support? It would be a conversation. And this goes to another truth in fundraising. If you want advice, ask for money. If you want money, ask for advice. And that's just another way of being relational. If you want advice, ask for money. Put your whole plan together, have it all in the can, have all the drawings and all the pictures and all the numbers, and then go to somebody with money and say, here's what we're doing and we'd like you to give us money. And they'll go, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? What if you tried this way? And let me send you some notes on what you did wrong there. And they won't give you any money. But if you go to them early in the process and say, we're thinking about this, and your experience in this world could really help us kind of walk through the process and figure it out. And then you enter into a conversation. What do you think of that? Would this work? Would that work? How would you do this if you were going to tackle this project? And then at some point along the way they go, you know, I think if you did it this way, it probably costs this much. You know, count me in for a third of that. I'll cover this part of it, right? When you ask for advice, you can get money. Doesn't work all the time, but it works more often than not. If you're genuine, so I want to get to this, right? Overcoming the fear of manipulation. Oy, it's hard. And it's here. It's all right here. It's like I said to, remind me your name, Greer? Andy. It's like I said to Andy this morning about golf. I always say this about golf. Golf is 90% mental and 10% mental. Donor development and fundraising is 90% mental and 10% mental. It's about what you tell yourself. And if you tell yourself that I need money from you, so I'm going to pretend to like you so you give me money, don't do that. You're a bad donor relationships person. You have to, in your heart and mind, genuinely care about the people who genuinely care about the ministry you're doing. It doesn't mean you have only on Facebook can you have 1,500 friends, right? You can't in real life have that many friends, but you can have good relationships with that many people. You can keep track of birthdays and anniversaries, and there's software that'll help you do that, but you need to be able to relate to people, and you need to genuinely care about them when you're with them. Now here's the trick. It's not a trick. It's a capacity. You have to have the capacity to be present with the person you're present with, and then when you're done with them, be done with them. And not in a bad way, but Craig, I'm going to sit with Craig. I want to hear about Craig's family. I want to pray with Craig. I want to know what's on the horizon for him professionally. I want to know how his surgery went. Whatever he's willing to share, right? Which goes back to that opening thing. As much as he's willing to share, I want to be in that moment with him, right? And a lot of my visits with Craig are going to have absolutely nothing to do with money. And we're going to talk about that in a minute, the disciplines of donor development. I'm there, right? And no matter how gut-wrenching or happy or emotional that conversation is, when I'm done, I'm done. By the time I've walked out his door and gotten in the car and driven away, I'm on to Andy, because that's where I'm going next. And when I'm with Andy, I care about Andy. Now, for some, that's hard. For those of you who know about yourself that you carry emotional baggage, like you absorb emotion from other people, and when you get in the car, you're still crying because they told you about their grandchild who's going through cancer treatment, and you just can't get over that. So now you're with Andy, and I can't stop thinking about Craig's granddaughter who's going through cancer treatment, and I really want to talk to you, Andy, but you got to be able to draw that line and say, care about you, pray for your granddaughter, let's talk about your family, what's going on with you, right? So you have to genuinely care about people, but you have to not get sucked into their life experience, right?
Okay, that's great and well, but now when I come back to Craig, how do I remember what he had told me when I've been talking to Andy and John and Sally and Dan?
Bingo.
I don't even remember Craig's first name, to be honest with you.
That's where you get a donor relationship software, donor management software program.
You have recommendations?
Bloomerang.
Yes, sir.
Top of the list is Bloomerang.
It's great. And you look them up before you go and see them.
Yes.
Remind yourself.
So you remind yourself. So somehow you take notes. So Bloomerang is like boomerang with an L in it. Bloomerang, and it's bloomerang.co is the name of the company, or is the name of the website, bloomerang.co, and they'll walk you through that.
I can show you the app before we leave.
Yeah, it's great.
Is it a free?
No. If you have less than 250 donors, it's free. Once you get over 250, then they have tiers. Yeah, it goes up. But I think the highest price is $100 a month for it.
It can be a little higher than
It can be more than that.
Is it also Apple-based?
Yes.
It's cloud. It's all cloud based.
So can you take Bloomerang, take your top 250 donors out of your 2,500 for in Salesforce?
Yes, you said you
use
could.
Bloomerang as your really high-end donor
Mhm.
base, and then take your 2,000 in Salesforce.
Yes. So that takes us to the next thing. So first, yes, right, you can.
Yes.
So to answer your question, donor relationships means you've got to take notes. You've got to take notes. Whether you write them down, my least favorite is Excel spreadsheet. But you got to take notes. You got to have something that tracks birthdays, anniversaries, key events, conversations, notes of conversations you had with them, and what you talked about, just to refresh yourself. And you need to know your capacity. Now, I have the capacity to carry a lot of stuff in my head. It's just one of my gifts that God gave me. So when I go and talk to Craig, as soon as I'm in that conversation with him, I remember everything we've talked about, right? And names and places and stuff. So the downside for me is I don't take enough notes in software. And so I do drop some information every once in a while. But for those who don't retain stuff in your head, nothing more important than taking notes, having notes, referring to your notes, and refreshing yourself. Even more important in an organization where you have multiple people interacting with donors and training them to go read the notes. So they want to know, you don't want to show up and talk to a donor and say, well, Craig was just here yesterday. Why are you here now? Well, because we don't talk to each other in our organization, we have no idea who's talking to the donors, right? Right. So that's key. You got to be able to do that. So have a donor software management program. Have it. I'm going to pick on Paul. I've worked with St. Paul High School in Concordia, Missouri. Paul's the head of school. They switched over to Blackbaud, Razor's Edge. So they have Razor's Edge, which is high end, but for them it does everything, right? Yeah. And so they did the research, and what's that?
It blows my nose.
It blows. Yeah. It brings him coffee. Blackbaud Razor's Edge is it's like the highest end that you can get, but that'll manage everything, and it's probably way more than most organizations need of the size that are here. So do your research, but those are good things. All right, where do we want to go? Let's get back to these questions. So we talked about one of your concerns is knowing the starting point. Who asked that, and what did you mean by that? Say more about it. Who asked the knowing the starting point question?
Starting point question, I think it was your question?
Oh, absolutely.
So what do you mean by that?
So, like, where do we begin? I mean, what's the scaffolding for within a church setting? I know there's different organizations in a church setting. I know that we need to start having some of our elderly start putting us in their work.
Yep.
Where do I start?
Okay.
I mean, that kind of simple.
So, couple of answers. First of all, it's relationships. So you need to know where those people are in their lifespan and where they are. You need to be in a relationship, so you need to cultivate. If you don't have a strong relationship, you need to cultivate. So that's going to take us into the 3 disciplines of development. Not fundraising, the 3 disciplines of development. They are cultivation, stewardship, and solicitation. So, and you need to do all 3 of those. So you have to ask yourself, are you cultivating a relationship with someone you don't know, even within your church? They're there every week, but you don't really know them. You don't know their family history. You don't know. So you're going to cultivate that relationship. You're going to intentionally meet them for coffee, go to their house, talk about that, get to know them. If you already have a relationship with them and you know them really well, stewardship is the process of staying in touch, sending a thank you card, noticing, I saw your daughter got an award at school. Congratulations, that's wonderful. Thinking of you, right? Solicitation is asking for money, and you do that rarely. We don't do it all the time. So each of these 3 disciplines have to be done in measure. So part of that, of the starting point, is start building the relationship. Then have resources available to you. I don't know how to do legacy giving. You know who does? The LCMS Foundation. They've got a network of people all over the country who will come in. And so at your church, as you have people, you start seeing, here's a couple and there's a person who are ready to do legacy giving, wills, and estate planning. Call LCMS Foundation and say, I'd like to host a coffee at our place. I'd like to do an adult study hour on wills and estate planning and legacy giving. And they'll come in and do that. And they have a way of sharing how that works and then taking the names of people who are interested in a personal visit. Now, the LCMS Foundation, no foundation will say, I am instructing you to give money to the church. But they will say, your church invited me in, would you like to include them in your will? And to what extent? And that kind of thing. So get an expert. If LCMS Foundation isn't available to you, find someone in your congregation or your community that's connected to you who does will and estate planning, and have them come and do a 1-hour talk on the importance of it and collect names and then start visiting with people to help them.
There's a link, and we haven't found how to handle it, but between the cultivation, stewardship, and solicitation, the ongoing effort.
Yep.
Both campaigns will run 2 years or longer. We do the drive, we get commitments to donations, and 4 months down the path, the donor hasn't met obligation to maybe a financial, whatever it was. do you bridge that, keep that relationship going?
Right? Good question. Time. So when we talk about relationships, remember, relationships take time and attention. And that's the stewardship piece. The stewardship piece is having it in your system, whether it's your donor management system or some other prompt that tells you, hey, have you sent a note to someone? So here's the standard I set for any development director I coach. So one of the things I do is development director coaching through what we call Mission Advancement Partnership. When I coach my development directors, I set 5 goals a week, but 2 of them are donor related specifically. One is 5 in-person visits with donors every week. Now, if you run a national ministry or international ministry and you have to do it by Zoom, do it by Zoom. COVID taught us how to do that by Zoom. But have 5, at minimum, 5 in-person visits with donors, and decide if it's a cultivation visit, a stewardship visit, or a solicitation visit. Why are you going there? What's the hook? Why do I want to talk to you? And tell them, would love to get together and share more about the ministry that you've shown interest in. I'd love to get together and hear how things are going and take some time, maybe pray together and grab a meal. It's our year-end appeal. We sent you something indicating how much money we'd like you to give at the year-end. I'd love to sit down and talk with you about that. So know why you're going for the visit. Right? Always have a hook. If you're a national ministry and you have regional pockets of donors, always have an anchor. The anchor is a visit that you get someone to agree to, and then you can tell everybody else in the area, I happen to be in town next week, would love to catch up with you, would love to find time with you. So hooks and anchors are always good in terms of relationship building. Then the other one that I say every week is 10 touches a day. 10 donor touches a day. Now you go, wow, that's a lot. Tell me how long it takes you to send 5 emails, 3 texts, and write 2 handwritten notes. If it takes you more than 20 minutes, you're doing it wrong. Because it's just a quick sentence. Hey, been thinking about you. How are things going? Would love to catch up soon. Boom, send the email, right?
Does Bloomerang keep track of that for you, like automatically? So that is there a tool that actually knows when you're sending text to your donor? That you're finding at that cheap level?
Text is a little more limited. Like on my phone right now, I can go to the person. I can click text. I can send them a text, and it will document that I sent them that text with what I said.
Because
yes.
I'm paying for a service like that, and I'd love to find a free service or cheaper.
Yeah, it tracks the text that I send, and I could probably track what they send back. But it can't. I can't like schedule a text about it.
It's like a tool that sits in between your CRM and all of your communication tools, so that it tracks everything you're doing between your donors and you. So
Right. Emails and texts you can track on Bloomerang.
Cool. Okay.
So that's at a minimum, right? So if you do the math, and it's a 5-day week, that's 50 donor touches a week, and it's 5 visits at a minimum. And it doesn't take a lot of your day to do that. Now, the touches are, so we're going to get into the science of this a little bit in these last few minutes, and we are going to deal with some of this. Your touches are necessary, particularly in cultivation, because statistically it takes 12 to 18 months to move a person from first introduction to your ministry to first significant gift. Now, it doesn't mean that after they first met you, they might not give you $100. But if they're capable of giving you $10,000, they're not going to get there until you've taken them through a process of 12 to 18 months that includes 6 to 8 in-person visits, face-to-face, and another 10 to 12 touches. Text, emails, handwritten thank you notes, letters, mailings about your ministry, whatever. So you put that into the system. So let's say you need, your ministry really, as you look at your aging donor population, needs more major donors, and your target this year is to find 5 new major donors. What do you have to do? You have to find a pipeline where you're going to get in front of as many people as you can get in front of to start finding the people who have an alignment with your ministry, and then you're going to put them into a process where you're going to regularly contact them to get in front of them 5 or 6 times in person, and you're going to send them follow-ups, and you're going to follow up on, if you're in a conversation with them and they say, oh, I'd love to, what's your ministry?
I am the content executive for a youth organization.
A youth organization. Okay, so I love youth. I was a youth director for 25 years. I think it's a wonderful part of, and I love people who are engaged in youth ministry. So I want to know more about your process. Like, how do you do that? So we've just had lunch together. I'd love to learn more. You've shared a little bit. As soon as you get back to your office, you send me more information about that. You follow up. Hey, Tim, had a great lunch, loved it. You had asked more about it. Here's some more information. Here's a link to blah, blah, blah. So that's a touch, right? I've followed up. I've done what I said I was going to do. So that's relationship building. You say what you're going to do. You follow up. That's overwhelming, right? So now I've got an organization with 5,000 donors. We'll do the math. 50 touches a week. How many weeks is it going to take me to get to 5,000 donors? Whew, that's a lot, right? So maybe I need to automate some of that, or I need to start dividing my donor list into tiers. And I'm a huge believer in having 4 tiers of donors. If you don't do that, go home and do it after you leave this conference. Because, statistically, the top 15% of your donors are giving 80 to 90% of your funding. So if you don't know who your top 15% of donors are, you are already missing the relationship boat. And that's true across ministries. And every ministry I've worked with, I've done the analysis of their donor giving. And I will tell you, except in the very rare case, the top 15% of donors are giving 80 to 90% of their funding. Now, this is where the whole overcoming the fear of manipulation comes in. You have to care about those people, but you also have to care about the lower 85%, because that's your future big givers are hiding in there. You have a relationship. You're not going to go find somebody new who's going to become your next 6-figure donor or 5-figure donor. You're going to find them in people who are already giving $100 a year, $200 a year, $500 a year. And you need to identify them, and there are research tools you can get. And then you need to put them into what we call a moves management strategy. So that's where you identify certain people in that lower 85% where you're going to up the cultivation and relationship work to move them to a closer relationship with the ministry so that they are inclined to give more closely to what they're capable of giving.
Those top tier people may not be your top donors. They may be the people who have the most connections to the people that you want to talk to.
Right. So, and that's networking, and relationships are about networking and so on. So you've got to think in terms of that. So if the top 15% of donors give 80 to 90% of your funding, you want to make sure those are the people. The top 5% are the ones you want to be in-person meeting with as a priority. The next 10% you want to do in-person or phone calls, direct contact with them. The lower 85%, you find the ones that you want to nurture, and you work on nurturing those relationships. So it starts to take the pressure off, right? Of, oh my gosh, it's overwhelming. I'm looking at 3,000 donors. I'll never be able to do this. I've had more people come to my workshops and leave going, it's an insurmountable mountain. I can't do it. I'll just quit. Right? I actually had a guy who came to a couple of different workshops of mine in different cities in the country, and then he quit because he's like, I can't. I know this is important. I know it has to be done. I can't do it, and he just gave up. So, I don't want any of you to give up. I want you to take it in small chunks. Do as much of this as you can, right?
That's where you and I were talking about the importance of now AI is so helpful.
Yes.
In, like, if you have a tool that can do all of that for you in a way that makes it really look like it's you.
Yep.
Then you don't have to be overwhelmed by it.
Right. And thank you for that, because that's automation, right? Automation. As much as possible, when you're doing the cultivation, put in place a donor acquisition plan. What's that mean? After someone has shown interest in your ministry, made a first gift, or contacted you at an event, and figure out where your pipelines are. Do you do Sundays at churches for your ministry? Do you do presentations at stuff like this for your ministry? What are your pipelines for getting interested people? Right? So it's a sales funnel kind of thing. Then how do you follow up with them? Within so many, so let's say I get a $5 donation to a ministry I lead. Within 24 hours, they get a note, right? Within a week, they get information about the ministry. Within 3 months, they get a second invitation to make another gift. Because we know one gift is a gift. The second gift, you're more inclined to stay as a long-term donor to an organization. So that's a donor acquisition strategy. Built into that is the relational stuff, the cultivation stewardship. That's a whole nother workshop that talks about qualifying donors, confidence scoring. And confidence scoring, real quick, is what's your confidence in somebody's capacity to give? So, like, go back to the J. Christopher. Could J. Christopher give $5 million to my startup high school? He absolutely could, right? So on a 0 to 10 scale of capacity, he's a 10. Is he willing to give money to my school? On that, he's a 1. So I don't ask Jay for money until I've moved his willingness to give closer to 10. And how do I do that? Relationship building, cultivation, spending time. So I want to wrap with this. Let's see if is there anything in here that we haven't sort of covered with this? And if so, what do you want to hear about?
Yeah, but are there any list acquisition for ministries right now to getting new donors?
No, I don't. I'm not a fan of those list acquisition. So, yeah.
I'm curious if there's newer things in that area.
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod isn't working to say these donors like missions.
Right.
Or these
Yep.
donors like education.
Yep. To my knowledge, they don't, and we don't. I don't. I'm not familiar with any. It is grassroots, person-to-person networking, building up the relationship. Converting the relationship to a new leadership. I worked with KFUO Radio. Big deal for them because they have radio hosts, and they bond to the host, not to the station. And so you have to be intentional when the host leaves or when the former director leaves in introducing the new director to the people. Again, it's passing on the relationship. It's championing that person. I'm the new director. I'm the old director. Here's the new director. New director wants you to meet Sally, who gives us $1 million a year. Sally, he's awesome. He's going to continue on in the legacy. I really would appreciate you getting to know him, and it would be a personal favor to me if you would continue to support this ministry under his leadership. So, again, it's relational, right? It's relational. You don't assume people are going to just keep giving to the ministry, particularly if they've bonded with current leadership or current staff. Got to be aware of that. Crowdfunding? It's another funnel to get people who indicate their heart aligns with your ministry because they drop $5 on you. You've got to have a way to follow up. Whatever your funnel is for getting people to say, hey, your ministry seems interesting to me. What's that? That's a flag that God has aligned their heart with your work. Now, as they dig into it, they may go, it's not what I thought it was. I'm going to move on. Or, oh my gosh, I didn't know you existed. What more can I do? Right? So that's sort of the spectrum. So whatever it is, crowdfunding, online platform. In the notes on Whova, there was a question about digital fundraising. Same answer for all fundraising. It's relationships. However you build that relationship, it's taking time. And that's where I want to finish. Here's the decision you must make. Will you invest the necessary time, resources, and effort to find those whose hearts align with your ministry and nurture relationships that lead to generosity? That's the question you have to answer. And every organization, when I talk about donor development and needing a donor person and so on and so forth, they're like, oh, that's so much money. There's so many other things, and that's a lot of money. If you want to grow your donor base, if you want to grow your income, you have got to invest in someone who wakes up every morning thinking, who am I going to tell about this ministry to do today, and where can I find them, and then goes out and finds them. And that takes time. It takes a lot of lunches and coffee and visits, and it's just, there's no shortcut to relationship building. There's simply no shortcut. There will always be people who love your ministry enough to put up with the annual appeal letter and the bake sale and all of the stuff that annoys them, because their love for the ministry is strong enough to get over that. But there are so many more people out there who would support your ministry if you took the time to sit with them, care about them, and invite them into that partnership, because they are partners in ministry. I've just helped hire, and now I'm coaching the development director for Lutheran Family Service of Iowa. And we chose a new title for her. Her new title is Donor Engagement Director, because it puts donor at first. If I say mission advancement, whose mission am I advancing? That's all about me. If I say director of development, what am I developing? That can sound like it's all about me. If I say donor engagement director, now I'm talking to a donor who wants to be engaged with my ministry, who wants to be a part of what I'm doing, and who sees it as a collaborative effort. Because God has put two things in our hearts: relationship and generosity. We are built to be generous. We want to give. We want to give. So if you develop a relationship, the generosity will follow for those whose hearts are aligned with your ministry. It just takes time. 2 books: A Spirituality of Fundraising, I mentioned. The other one is called World Changing Generosity by Jim and Nancy Cotterill. Cotterrill. Cotterrill. Jim and Nancy Cotterill. Jim was the director of the Christian Foundation of Indiana for years and years and years. He runs a ministry called Unite Indy now in Indianapolis. Jim's a friend, and he wrote a book, and in that book he did research about, across cultures, the natural inclination of human beings to be generous. People want to be generous. It's built into us by our Creator. And they want to be generous to your ministry when you find the people whose hearts are aligned with your ministry. That takes time. It takes time. It's called World Changing Generosity. World Changing Generosity. Available on Amazon, both Kindle and paperback. Yeah.
Different topic. What are some of the most common mistakes that you've seen in fundraising?
Gosh, we have a minute. The most common mistake is the ATM machine. I mean, the most common mistake, and for every organization, what I consider the most common mistake is the annual appeal letter. One letter, one page that tells the donor all about how wonderful you are and what you did this year and how great you are, and give us more money so we can keep being wonderful. Be relational. Tell stories. Make it donor-centric. Your generosity, your partnership has made this. Together, we are changing the world. We have, without you, we couldn't do all of the things we're doing. Here are all the things we're doing together. Make it much more robust. Make it a part of a relationship, not just a year-end, oh, thought of you, here's a letter, give us money. That's the biggest mistake I see organizations make, is just throwing something out there. We all have. We all have.
You coach people. How do you use metrics?
Thanks, Andy.
To figure out whether or not they're doing a good job when you're spending your time? You said
I can talk to you about that.
Yeah.
5 key goals, weekly check-ins, look at their performance, what they're doing, how many visits they're doing, and so on. Try and remove impediments to their success. We'll talk more. All right. Thank you all. Pushed you right to the last minute.